Hey, what's up guys? This video is going to have spoilers for Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, and also Warbreaker, which is a Brandon Sanderson Cosmere novel outside of the Stormlight Archive series. In the Oathbringer epilogue, Wit awakened a doll. This was a very direct nod to Warbreaker, in which Vasher awakened a doll in the prologue. So it makes us wonder, what else from Warbreaker may translate over to the Stormlight Archive? How about the main feature? An awakened stone statue army. In the Words of Radiance prologue, Jasnah slipped into Shadesmar. While she was there, Jasnah grabbed a bead. She gave it power, and other beads collected before her, taking the shape of one of the statues that lined the front of the feast hall. The statue of Talenala Alin, Herald of War. A tall, muscular man with a large shard blade. The bead statue that she created was not alive, but she made it move, lowering its sword of beads. Jasnah doubted that it could fight because round beads could not form a sharp sword. But what if they could figure out a way to awaken the stone statues themselves? Because we know from Warbreaker that the stone statues can fight and do it pretty well. In Warbreaker, there was a special army, Vasher's army, which the people called Kalad's Phantoms. Kalad's Phantoms were an army of lifeless, which Vasher had created to end the Many War 300 years prior. During most of the story, Kalad's Phantoms were sort of a myth, but it turned out Kalad's Phantoms were real. They had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Kalad's Phantoms were the stone statues all around the city, the statues known as the Dedener Celebrant. Now, those statues were not ordinary statues. The Dedener statues had human bones inside of them, and that was important. Because they had human bones inside of them, they were able to be awakened. So the next question becomes, are there any statues on Roshar that also have bones inside of them? Yep. In Words of Radiance, it was said that when kings and wealthy light eyes died, their bodies weren't burned like those of common men. Instead, they were soul cast into statues of stone or metal, forever frozen. So those statues have bones inside of them, which, as Elscholar 17.5 on the 17 Shard forum pointed out, was one of the requirements, at least in Warbreaker. In The Way of Kings, we learn that even some wealthy dark eyes have had their bodies soul casted into statues. Here are two examples from families that we know and love. Shallan's family has a mausoleum carved into a hill near their manor, and inside that mausoleum, ancient Devar family members had been soul casted into statues. Similarly, the Colin family has a mausoleum of old kings turned to statues. And last but not least, in Kholinar, there was even a mausoleum for the favored servants of some house. So there are potentially hundreds or even thousands of statues on Roshar that are like this, people who were soul casted into statues when they died. That means that there's a huge population of statues with bones inside of them that may be awakened at some point in the story, the Stormlight Archive. So the next logical question is whether or not there are any clues that this may happen. And there are. Here are just 4 of the clues that I found. First, the Stormlight Archive has worldhoppers from Warbreaker, 2 of whom were intimately connected to Kalad's Phantoms, namely Vasher and Nivenna, now going by the names Zahel and Highmarshall Azure. And not only are they now on Roshar, but we've got an outstanding plot point from Warbreaker that may play a part. At the end of Warbreaker, Vasher told Nivenna that there were hundreds, perhaps thousands of awakening commands that they hadn't yet discovered. And as you know, words play a major role in the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance. So that's the first clue that this may happen. There are new commands to be learned, and it just so happens that Vasher and Nivenna are on Roshar now, where they may implement these new words. The second clue appears in some wordplay with Shallan. When Shallan first began weaving images of people out of light, they did not move. Her phantoms were like a statue that could be detailed, yet still dead. Shallan noted that the eyes were lifeless, and their chests didn't rise and fall with breath. So within this passage, there are 3 words that are intimately connected with the story of Warbreaker: statue, lifeless, and breath. So that's the second quote-unquote clue, although admittedly, at best, it's very subtle, and most likely, it meant nothing. This next one's a little better though. Clue 3. Let's go back to that Words of Radiance quote about soul-casted light eyes. That quote is part of the opening passage to Words of Radiance Chapter 2, a chapter which begins with the word breath. Breath. A man's breath was his life. So we have a passage about soul-casted stone statues and breath. A pretty explicit nod to Warbreaker, which leads me to believe that this may actually happen in the Stormlight Archive. We may see another stone army. Alright, I like that one, but here's clue 4. This one's great. Clue 4 can be found in the Oathbringer chapter titled Spirit, Mind, and Body. Those 3 words are a blatant nod to realmatic theory, how there are 3 realms, a physical, cognitive, and spiritual. Spirit, Mind, and Body is a very important chapter for this awakened statue army theory, because it's the chapter in which King Gavilar himself was soul-casted into a statue. This chapter opened up with a wizened Ardent saying, quote, Spirit, Mind, and Body. Death is the separation of the 3. The body remains in our realm to be reused. Look at that line, a body being reused. In hindsight, that may be a pretty heavy-handed clue that King Gavilar's body, which is now a statue, it may be awakened, reused. And as Use the Falchion said over on the 17 Shard forum, wouldn't it be wild if Dalinar has to fight an awakened stone statue of his brother, King Gavilar? How intense would that be? So 2 of the clues are a little vague, but Vasher and Nivenna are now in Roshar, and the Ardent spoke about the physical body being reused. This theory definitely has some legs. Now let's quickly highlight some of the key references to stones and statues, specifically living statues. Rock stood like a tan-skinned statue, and the prolonged use of the Soulcaster had transformed the eyes of an Ardent so that they sparkled like gemstones themselves. And her skin had hardened to something like stone, smooth with fine cracks. It was as if the person were a living statue. At the end of Oathbringer, Kaladin mistook one of the fused, the brawny one, for another part of the stony field, and Ivory said that compared to other humans, Jasna was practically a stone. Ivory himself was described as having features like that of a roughed-out statue the sculptor had neglected to finish. And that reminds me of the giant foot of the unfinished statue that Yalb told Shallan about in Chapter 1 of Words of Radiance. Imagine if that statue was somehow finished or put back together and awakened, a huge statue fighting in battle. Epic. The palace guards in Kholinar stood like statues. The singer named Demid was described as looking more like a statue than a listener, and both Kaladin and Shallan thought of the 30-foot-tall Spren guarding the Oath Gates as statues in armor. Pattern looked like a statue to Kaladin, and Kaladin thought that the Reachers, who were the Lightspren sailors in Shadesmar, Kaladin thought that they looked like humans with strange bronze skin, metallic, as if they were living statues. Adolin's blade stood silent like a statue. Aiko was described as resembling a soul-cast king. Kaladin and Adolin stood like 2 statues beside Shallan and Shadesmar, and Kaladin thought that one of the slain Thunderclast lay like a toppled statue. This actually leads into another topic. We know that there are a lot of soul-casted Light Eyes and Wealthy Dark Eyes, and we already mentioned that giant unfinished statue. But what other type of awakened may we see in the Stormlight Archive? Towards the end of the epic Oathbringer chapter 120, the spear that would not break, Shallan and Jasna were walking together, discussing soul casting. Then Jasna turned around and waved her hand at approaching fused. Stone formed from air, completely encasing them. It was brilliant. So basically, Jasna created stone statues of the fused, in a relatively similar way in which soulcasters have created stone statues of Gavilar, other Light Eyes, and some Wealthy Dark Eyes. That begs the question, can these stone statues of the fused be reawakened, and if so, who would they fight for? Here's another cool one. How about an awakened Chasm Fiend? In Words of Radiance, Adolin came across what he initially thought was a statue of a Chasm Fiend. Turns out, it was a real Chasm Fiend, one that had died there centuries ago, and instead of being blown away, it had slowly crusted over with creme. Wouldn't it be cool if that Chasm Fiend, or others like it, were awakened? Imagine an awakened Chasm Fiend battling against a Thunderclast. That'd be so gnarly. Now let's discuss how effective a soul-casted stone or metal statue army would be. Potentially very effective. Here's a quote from the end of Warbreaker, quote, awakened objects could be so much stronger than human muscles. If a lifeless could be created from bones, made strong enough to move a rock body around it, you'd have soldiers unlike any that had ever existed. Vasher created the army, and as Vasher himself put it, quote, "I think you'll find those phantoms of mine to be very effective. Weapons are virtually useless against the stone." Of course, we're now speaking about the Stormlight Archive, and on Roshar, there are shard blades. As Adolin said during the fight against the Thunder class, shard blades were designed specifically to cut through stone. So a stone army of Awakened, it's more vulnerable on Roshar than it was on Nalthis, but regardless, an Awakened stone army would be a very useful addition to any army as long as you can control it. That's the next topic. Who would control such an Awakened army? Well, obviously that depends on which side awakens the statues. Both sides may raise statues, but here are some potential commanders for an Awakened statue army. We've got to start with Zahel. As Honorless on the 17 Shard forum pointed out, we've got Awakeners on Roshar, the prime example being Vasher himself, the man who created Kalad's phantoms over on Nalthis. At the end of Warbreaker, Vasher gave control of the Dedenner statue army over to Sesebron. So in a way, it would be great to see Vasher or Zahel take control of such an army and use it, just as he did 300 years prior to the Warbreaker story. And obviously, Nivenna is another great option, especially because in the Stormlight Archive, Nivenna, now going by the name Highmarshall Azure, she's proven to be a dedicated and respected military leader in Kholinar. Then we've got Kaladin. Just like Highmarshall Azure, Kaladin is another great military leader, Captain Kaladin. And Kaladin very well may lead an Awakened army. Here's why. The Awakened statue army in Warbreaker was called Kalad's Phantoms. So wouldn't it be cool if a statue army in the Stormlight Archive was called Kaladin's Phantoms? Speaking of phantoms, Shallan has actually already raised a few phantom armies of her own. At Uruthiru, Shallan made an army of a score to distract the Unmade, Re-Shafir, the Midnight Mother. In Shadesmar, Shallan created an illusion of about 20 to distract the Fused while she tried to figure out how to get her, Adolin, and Kaladin out of Shadesmar. Then, after they got back to the physical realm and regrouped on the battlefield with Dalinar, Shallan wove light into a full phantom army, an army which was used to distract Amaram's troops who were enraged by the thrill. "Go," Adolin said. "I'll be fine. Save the city. Be radiant, Shallan." She wove her power, and an army climbed from the ground around her. So, there's a chance that this new phantom army, so to say, would be Shallan's to control. But I doubt it. Shallan's phantom army so far have just been distractions, because Shallan isn't a military leader, though it's worth noting that Shallan was very creative and effective in how she used her phantom armies already. Bravo, milady. Bravo. Speaking of milady, how about my favorite girl in the entire story? One of my favorite women in any story, the wickedly talented Queen Jasnah Kholin. Like we said earlier, Jasnah formed a fake shard bearer out of beads, resembling the Telenala Alin statue. So Jasnah is already connected to this concept of awakened statues. In a sense, the army may be hers regardless of who actually leads it, since Jasnah is now queen. At least, that would apply to any statues that were awakened in Althkar. But as much as I absolutely love and admire the Alpha Cat of this story, I don't think she'll be leading this awakened army per se, because Jasnah's skills are best suited to doing a variety of other stuff other than just leading soldiers in battle. I mean, Jasnah herself is a one-woman army in her own right. In terms of being a badass, Radiant Jasnah puts the Blackthorn of old to shame. Sorry to say that. But speaking of Blackthorn, we all love the Blackthorn, or who he's become, right? I don't foresee him directly leading an awakened army, since he's probably just going to delegate command to someone as he oversees all aspects of the military front. But Dalinar may be involved in its awakening, which is the next topic that I want to speak about. Who will awaken the statues? When Dalinar was in Thaylen City, trying to gain allies for the war, he used his bondsmith powers to repair a wall. Then, Dalinar repaired a statue. On top of that, Dalinar is the most powerful of the three bondsmiths. As the Stormfather told him, quote, "Do not look towards the power of others. even those who share your surges. Their lot is not yours, and their powers are small, petty things. What you did in reknitting those statues was a mere trifle, a party trick. Yours is the power Ishar once held. Before he was Herald of Luck, they called him Binder of Gods. He was the founder of the Oath Pact. No Radiant is capable of more than you. Yours is the power of connection, of joining men and worlds, minds and souls. Your surges are the greatest of all, though they will be impotent if you seek to wield them for mere battle. Bold statement by the Stormfather, but I dig it. So, we saw what Dalinar could do at the end of Oathbreaker. He brought together the three realms. It was awesome. Dalinar has been leveraging that same power in the Rhythm of War pre-release chapters. But look at this line here. Yours is the power of connection, of joining men and worlds, minds and souls. That sounds like the type of power that may be needed to awaken the statues of Roshar. Maybe not though. Dalinar himself said that he can only fix inanimate things, that his son does the more important work, namely Renarin. Renarin is a healer, so are Soulcasted statues considered inanimate things that Dalinar could fix? Or would they be considered animate things, since in theory, they have the human bones inside of them? Admittedly, that's above my pay grade right now in terms of the Cosmere mechanics, but regardless, wouldn't it be cool if Renarin awakened the statues of Roshar through a process of healing, for lack of better words? Because if Renarin healed the Soulcasted statues, so to say, that might mean that their soul returns as well. This is unlikely though. Don't expect a Gavilar statue to be reanimated as Gavilar himself. We'll get back to this at the end of the video, when we review the words of Brandon Sanderson himself. Alright, who else aside from Dalinar and Renarin might be the one to awaken statues if it happens? Not who would control them, but who might awaken them. Of course, Zahel is another good choice, and so is Highmarshall Azure, mainly due to that open-ended plot point at the end of Warbreaker that we mentioned, how there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of awakened commands that they hadn't yet discovered. There's also some evidence to believe that it may be Shallan. At the end of Oathbringer, Jasnah told Shallan that soulcasting is a practiced art, that Shallan must not order stones, as they are more stubborn than men. Instead, it is best to use coercion when soulcasting stone. It is best to speak to the stones of freedom and movement. This dialogue reminds me of that line at the end of Warbreaker, when Vasher told Nivenna that there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of awakening commands that they hadn't yet discovered. In terms of soulcasting, Jasnah has learned many commands, so to say, and Shallan is presumably going to learn some of her own in Rhythm of War. So will one of those commands that Shallan learns relate to awakening a stone army? We'll find out soon when Rhythm of War comes out. Alright, let's do this. The final section. The words of Brandon Sanderson himself. Invocation on the 17 Shard forum pointed out that Brandon Sanderson himself has actually already weighed in on this theory. So, as you know, Gavilar was one of the many people soulcasted into a statue. Brandon Sanderson was asked whether the people who got soulcasted into stone could be awakened. And Brandon Sanderson paused before answering, so, yes, but their soul is gone. When they soulcast into stone, it is only the corpse, so yes, they could. I don't know if that's necessarily how he said it, I'm just reading text. Alright, the questioner then asked, would it be a lifeless or would it be like awakening something inorganic, or would them once being alive help? To which Brandon Sanderson responded, the fact that they were once alive will help. There's a spiritual connection that still exists in the spiritual realm, and that's going to help. But you're not going to get the person back. The fact that it is the exact form of a person is going to be really helpful. It would be a lot easier to awaken that than it would be to awaken other stone. So Brandon is basically saying that it is possible to awaken the soulcasted statues, which means this theory is in play, but that if they were to awaken someone like Gavilar, it wouldn't actually be Gavilar. With that said, I'd like to end with this quote here to play a little devil's advocate because Brandon may be tricking us. In Shadesmar, the Spren Aiko asked Kaladin if he knew how to manifest souls, because according to Aiko, some humans know how to do so. It is rare among the Spren as well. The gardeners among the cultivation are best at it, but Aiko, who is a light Spren, he's unpracticed in manifesting souls. Manifesting souls. That concept applies to a lot of the magic in this story. What I am wondering though, is whether the concept of manifesting souls applies to sort of a higher level awakening than we saw in Warbreaker. So even though Sanderson specifically said that if you awaken a soul-casted statue, you will not get the person back, I still wonder if it's possible. We're just going to have to RAFO, read and find out. November 17th, when Rhythm of War drops. That's it for today. I hope you liked my first ever theory video for the Stormlight Archive, my favorite series ever. There's going to be a lot more to come, so if you're new here, hit subscribe. And I think I can speak for all of you in saying that Brandon Sanderson, you airsick lowlander, you rock. Thank you for being you.